like, is it okay for me to call myself Chinese if I can't, if my language isn't up to par? Yeah, it's a confidence issue for all of us, no matter how little or much we know, because at the end of the day, we were born overseas.
Hey, welcome back to the SituAsian Room, a journey into Asian America. We dive deep into the issues in the Asian American community, from questions like, where are you really from? And representation to sharing food and our own experiences. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach. On this episode, we invite Dorothy Chan into the SituAsian Room to discuss journeying back to the motherland and more, so stay tuned. Coming up first, we'll dish it out with some Asian dishes.
Welcome back to the Dish It Out table. Last week, we discussed new dishes in the Asian community that Zach and I weren't really familiar with. But this week, we bring it back home and we are introducing dishes from our own culture. So this week, I decided to introduce kinilaw. And if you guys know this dish, you know that it's a really refreshing appetizer. It's perfect for the summer when you're hanging out with family in the backyard on a hot summer day. Zach, this is actually the Filipino version of ceviche.
Ooh.
So yeah, really refreshing. Kinilaw comes from the Visayan region of the Philippines. The name kinilaw is actually derived from the word kilaw, which means raw or uncooked. And this raw fish, it can be whatever fish you like. My family, personally, we do salmon, and it's amazing. It's quote unquote cooked in vinegar and mixed with calamansi, which is Philippine lemon, sour green mangoes, black peppers, onions, ginger, and chili pepper. It's usually served as an appetizer, and I just pile my plate high with it because it's so good and it's so refreshing. It's exactly what you like crave on like a hot summer day when the family's over. And usually this also pairs really well with drinking and beer. I know a lot of my uncles will have a small plate of it with whatever beer that they're drinking just because it pairs really nicely with it. But yeah, it's so good. It's really, if you chop up the fish into bite-sized pieces and it's just tossed, and like the longer it sits in that vinegar and lemon juice, the more flavor comes out, which I absolutely love.
That sounds really good. I've had a ceviche a couple of times, but I've never tried that. Yeah, so for my dish, I've chose to bring to the dish out table. In Cantonese, it's called Lobaco. It's in English, it's fried turnip cake.
Ooh.
I think technically it's fried. So basically, lobak means like daikon radish, and so you take that radish and like you could chop it really thinly, but a lot of people like grate it, and then you cook it down. You add like rice flour, water, and you put stuff in it. Chinese sausage or lapchung is really good inside. People put like some people put shiitake mushrooms, but yeah, and then you mix it all together and you steam it, and you just steam it in like a tray for a while, and then it becomes like solidified. You let it cool, and then you cut it up, and then you pan fry it. So yeah, that's a favorite. It's a big dim sum dish.
I was gonna ask if it was dim sum.
Definitely, yeah. Cantonese food. It's hard not to talk about dim sum. But
I
yeah,
definitely have to try that. I've never heard of that before, actually.
It's pretty common. It's a classic dim sum dish, I think. Like I try to make it myself and actually turned out well. So,
oh really?
Yeah, definitely a favorite of mine. It's a weird thing because it's like, what the hell is a turnip cake? But it's good.
You said turnip cake and I was kind of about it,
Yeah,
but then you said it was
good.
like daikon radish, and I personally love daikon radish.
Yeah,
I love the flavor of it, and just now, like you said that it was daikon radish, and immediately I was like, oh, actually that sounds pretty good. And then you told me like
yeah.
everything is mixed in with it. I personally also love Chinese sausage, It's so good.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, daikon's pretty well like widely used in Asian culture, and like I know the Vietnamese use it like on the side of
Hmm.
stuff, and they pickle it. I know it's like some people refer to it as like Japanese radish too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, like cake makes it seem misleading because you think of
Turnip
like
threw me off, and
sweet.
then cake
Yeah,
threw
it's
me
like
off even more.
oxymoron. But that's one of my favorites for sure.
That wraps it up for this episode's Dish It Out segment.
And the purpose of Dish It Out is to share cuisines from Asian American Pacific Islander culture because we believe that a dish is better if you share. If you have any recipes you'd like to share, send it to us on social media or through our website, and we'd love to bring your dishes and recipes to the Dish It Out table.
Coming up next is our topic interview with Dorothy Chan, and we talk about our journey back to the motherland. Okay, guys, welcome back. So, for this week, we're going to be talking about Journey to the Motherland. And our guest is Dorothy Chan. Hi, Dorothy.
Hello.
So, tell us about yourself before we, dive into things. Tell us about everything, where you're from, what you're studying, interests, hobbies. Give us all of it.
Okay, so right now I am a rising senior at UM. My two majors are economics and Chinese studies, and I have two minors in international studies and exercise physiology. It's a wide array of studies and extracurriculars. Next year, I'm going to be the president of the Hong Kong Student Association.
Woo!
And I'm also the treasurer for the weightlifting team.
Well, Dorothy, we're so excited to have you. This episode, the topic is the motherland. And when we say the motherland, we're describing where some generation of our family came before coming here to the United States. And for many Asian Americans that grow up here in the States, visiting the motherland can be an exciting but also challenging experience. And it may force us to question our identity.
Yeah, definitely. For me, my motherland is the Philippines. So, a little bit of history about my family. Both my parents were born in the Philippines. My mom stayed in the Philippines all her life through all of her schooling. She went to medical school in the Philippines, and she didn't come to the United States until her residency. And that's where she came from, the Philippines, and moved to Staten Island, New York. And that's where she met my dad. And for my dad, he was born in the Philippines, but he actually moved to the United States. He moved to New York when he was about 3 years old. So he pretty much grew up in the United States. And it's definitely weird for me just because I'm not real. I feel like first gen, but I'm technically second generation. I'm like in that weird gray area where I don't really know. But one thing that is for sure is that when we talk about going back home to the motherland, it's always just, it brings so many good memories just because it's just that idea of going back home to family. What about you guys? Where's your motherlands?
So same as you, I'm also first generation Asian American. My parents were born in Hong Kong. All of my family, extended family, are in Hong Kong. I have like some in Canada too. And my dad had met my mom at a bank. She was working at a bank in Hong Kong. And my dad had actually studied at UM as an undergrad and for graduate school. So he ended up moving from Hong Kong to Miami back in 1997. And I've asked him before, and it didn't have anything to do with the 1997 handover, believe it or not. He just moved here because he wanted to, and brought my mom along, and they got married in the States. And then that's how me and my sisters were born.
Wait, before I move on, can you explain what the 1997 handover is to people who don't know?
Right. So Hong Kong was a British colony at one point, and then 1997 was that turning point year where Hong Kong was formally given back to China. just to put it all briefly. And hence why we're seeing a lot of, protests nowadays, especially with like rising tensions between a very liberal and autonomous Hong Kong and Beijing.
Awesome. Thank you, Dorothy. So for me, I got the same motherland as you. Hong Kong, what a beautiful place. I've never been. I've never left the country, and I really want to go. But my dad was born in Hong Kong, but he moved here when he was 8 months old. So my grandparents all came from Hong Kong, and my mom's side from southern China in that general region. But when they came here, they went to New York as well, like Emilie. I feel like that's a common thing for people on the East Coast. But yeah, my dad also studied at UM for undergrad, which I didn't know that your dad did too, Dorothy. That's so cool.
Wow, we have some legacy claims out here.
Yeah, so Hong Kong is my motherland. Never been. Really want to go. So to move on, take us back to the first time you remember going and visiting your motherland, Dorothy.
Oh boy. So I used to go every single summer back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, since I was born, every single summer I'd go with my dad, my mom, and two little younger sisters. As they were born, they joined the ride with me. That long 18-hour plane ride to Hong Kong from Miami. And we would stay for the entire summer. So we would stay with our dad's side of the family. We had an apartment in Kowloon, one of the stations on the MTR in Hong Kong. And yeah, I remember a lot of just dim sum, walking. It was hot, and subways. That's the most vivid memories I have of Hong Kong, and the smell of sewage, actually. So every single time I smell the sewers now, it takes me straight back to Hong Kong, as gross as that sounds. And yeah, I went back every single summer up until around 6th grade. Then I just stopped and had a little hiatus until I went back last summer of 2019 to study abroad in Hong Kong again for 5 weeks.
Oh,
That's so cool. So going back and building off of the first times you were there, what immediately stuck out to you as a kid? Oh, this is really different from back home.
Considering I was born and raised in a city, there wasn't that much of a culture shock to me. But Hong Kong is most definitely, city life, very urban, globalized. The brands there I recognized because a lot of them were also Western brands. I remember going to the malls, seeing Louis Vuitton, Gucci, all that high-end stuff that you see all over the world too, and especially in the States. That was all there, McDonald's, KFC, Pizza Hut, those 3 restaurants are...
I swear, having fast food in Asia is a completely different experience, because that's actually one of the most vivid memories that I have from the first time I went back, the last time I went back to the Philippines. It's something different about it. The menus are different. I think honestly the quality of food is so much better.
Yeah, customer service is also
Customer service is much more polite.
Yes. That all comes down back to the culture. One of the biggest differences that I noticed between Miami, where I was born, and Hong Kong is definitely infrastructure. People, it's not often you own a car. There's just so many cars out there already, and Hong Kong's transportation system is absolutely amazing. And I was so sad flying back to Miami and noticing I have to drive everywhere now. As much as I would love to walk, and I love to walk, you can't, because that's just not how things are structured in the States, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, the MTR, the metro system, is definitely one of the largest differences.
I heard that the MTR is like one of the few public transportation systems in the world that like subsidize the rest of the government because it works so well and it's so often used and it's very profitable. Whereas like in the States, our public transport isn't really great compared to most countries. And I know, um, especially in Miami, like when I first moved to Miami, it was weird because there was a metro, like you have the metro rail, but it just goes north south, and there's a bunch of buses, but it's not a very walkable city, and it's all built around cars, and that's something that I think older cities in the U.S., especially in the East Coast, are like more adapted to walking. But that's just a big thing I noticed about Miami in general. It's very sprawled out.
Dorothy, what was the most comforting thing while you were abroad? You know, what was that like, that one, if you could pick one thing that you experienced when you were abroad and it was like that warm and fuzzy feeling, that really nice, like, comfort?
Walking. Most definitely walking and taking public transportation. Because,
Really?
oh, definitely. That is the for sure way for you to completely immerse yourself in that culture is getting off on different stations and just exploring. And even then, you wouldn't have to always take the MTR because you could walk from station to station. So I've done that before when I was studying abroad. I stayed at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, which is in the New Territories. So the station for that would be Dai Hall. It's University Station. And just like a 10-minute ride from there is Wongkok. It's like on like another color line, not too far. And you could literally get off on that station and walk straight down all the way down to like, I don't know, 5 stations down. I mean, yeah, it's going to take some time, but that made me so nostalgic of, what I missed about Hong Kong was being able to walk the streets, see all these vendors, hear the language, and eat a lot of food.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's crazy that you think that, for some people that just walking and taking public transportation is, that it brings that sense of comfort. Because for myself, when I went back to the Philippines in 2013, the one thing that really brought that warm and fuzzy feeling was eating, I think, comfort food, or at least the foods that I thought was comfort foods, every single day, because that's what they normally eat. But for me, because growing up in the United States, we have it often, but it's not as common. So like I remember waking up and having fish, like fried fish and rice and tomatoes, and like that's normally a weekend, I guess, delicacy that we don't normally consume like on an everyday basis. But in the Philippines, that's like you eat that every single morning.
Right.
And just, yeah, waking up. And for me, honestly, it was the weather. And I know it's hot and humid in the Philippines and everybody complains about it, just like Miami. I'm sure it's like that in Hong Kong, but I remember waking up and feeling like the heat and just knowing that I wasn't in the United States. I was in the motherland. It literally brought that warm feeling in me that I was home.
Something I'm curious about for both of you, because I've never left the country, is when you were there, like ethnically, genetically, you are tied to those places because they're relatively ethno states. But what made you stand out from the locals as an American?
For me, definitely it was mannerisms and etiquette, because I think for me, like in the Philippines, yeah, it's not really, I mean, I guess etiquette is not the right word. It's just my mannerisms, how I would walk around, posture, and just my behaviors around, compared to my cousins and my other relatives in the Philippines, people could easily like pick me out and know that I was a tourist or that I wasn't from living in the Philippines. What about you, Dorothy?
Definitely appearance was what stood out the most. My first language was English, actually, but my Cantonese was not bad. It wasn't so bad that like you could tell, oh yeah, she's definitely overseas born. Um, but definitely a lot of years of sun exposure in Miami has made me significantly darker than like
Definitely.
what Hong Kongers would like to look like. So
Hmm.
that's definitely my skin color and also the way that I dressed, like the clothes that I bought all from Miami. It was a very clear like she's from Miami, not from Hong Kong kind
Yeah.
of
You brought up
deal.
another point too. Language is important because I mean, yeah, people if I spoke Tagalog, um, even the way I speak it sometimes it would people might be able to pick it out that I
Mhm.
was overseas born, but I don't speak it at all. So, and that's one of the things that I know that I want to learn moving forward into the future. I want to learn my mother tongue. I just I remember going back to the Philippines and my cousins had to translate almost everything. I understand bits and pieces, but like long sentences or when relatives were talking in like rapid fire Tagalog, it was hard for me to keep up. So I had my cousins like translating me like along like the 3 weeks that we were there. And I'm sure people like I wasn't speaking Tagalog. I was speaking mainly English. So it was easy for people to be like, oh yeah, she is born overseas.
And that makes me wonder sometimes, it raises a question of how much confidence can I have in myself to call myself like a Hong Konger or Chinese? You know, I'm going to be the president of HKSA next year, but I could not, I don't know that much Cantonese. You know, like if I were to hear Carrie Lam, uh, she, she's you know,
The executive.
right, chief executive of Hong Kong right now. But if
Mhm.
I were to hear her speak on the TV, like the news, I could not understand a word of what she says because it's very formal. You really had to have been like raised in Hong Kong and been exposed to that kind of formal language in order for you to even understand it. So, like, is it okay for me to call myself Chinese if I can't, if my language isn't up to par? You know, yeah, it's a confidence issue for all of us, no matter how little or much we know, because at the end of the day, we were born overseas.
What's the term in Cantonese for people like us, like you and I?
Oh. So I would be a chuxing mui and mui because I'm a girl, and then you'd be a chuxing zai.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
Yes.
so that's that's I was talking to my grandma about it, and she was laughing because she was like, "How do you know that?" And I was like, "My friend told me," because she knows I don't speak any Cantonese. Like I can say certain foods and like bathroom, and like I don't speak Cantonese. Because I grew up around it a lot, but I was just never taught it. And anytime I go into like Chinatown or something like that, they'll try to say something to me, and I'll just like not. I don't know what they're saying, and then they give you like the stare, and they're like, "Oh." But I'm curious, like, what expectations do they have, like in Hong Kong, of people like you and I, who are American born?
I would say that once they realize that your language, especially, is not up to par and you're very clearly not a native, they will change to English so fast. Like they won't even give it a second chance of like trying Cantonese again. And like I know because I can get by with Cantonese, like I can have conversations. So like for the most part, I would use Cantonese in Hong Kong. But as soon as like the vocabulary got a little too complex or like the conversation got a little too deep, I got uncomfortable and I would switch straight to English. Like I would have to use, that like Chinglish, which is like very common in Hong Kong too, because they are all trilingual.
Hmm.
They know English. Um, but I guess like we're really no different from like any foreigner or tourist that's visiting if you are not from Hong Kong, really. And that kind of makes me sad because I do have some history there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I read somewhere about during more of the height of the protests, that they would use signs and like phonetically write out like in with English letters like certain words in Cantonese to like test people like if they were mainlanders or not. Are you familiar with that at all?
I am not.
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't know if you would know anything about that, but it was like a quick thing.
That's interesting. Because as far as I know, with the use of English in Hong Kong, it's very like mainstream, like popular, because you see it in a lot of casual entertainment settings. So say like some podcasts. I listen to some Hong Kong Cantonese podcasts, TV shows and stuff, especially the TV shows that are based a little like in more modern eras, you know, like the police shows and stuff. There's a lot of police and doctor shows.
Oh,
They
wow.
use English. Like English is very much a part of the language too. And I guess it's also because of its you know, rich history as a British colony.
That's
Interesting.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we discussed like how Hong Kong's been changing a little bit, and I know that you've been there when you were little, and then going back very recently. So can you walk us through like what are some of the changes you've seen, and do you think that Hong Kong is having its own identity crisis, and if so, how would you characterize it?
So what I've definitely noticed is that there's like a changing demographic, I guess, of the types of Chinese people there. So there's, you know, Hong Kongers, and then there's the people from mainland, but like typically the bigger cities, you wouldn't really find like rural, you know, people from China moving into Hong Kong, because at the end of the day, Hong Kong is a business center. It's a business hub, financial hub. Um, One of the things is the prevalence of Mandarin is definitely increasing in Hong Kong. Now, I don't know if it's because I was a kid, I don't remember much, but I definitely don't recall hearing as much Mandarin as I do now. Um, as far as like me having, you know, studied abroad last summer on the MTR, I was surprised by how much Mandarin was being used. And my thoughts are maybe just like people from mainland China are just moving in, and like that's that.
Oh, wow.
I Yeah, I don't think it's because uh, Beijing is trying to intrude and change the education system, wipe out culture. I don't think that's it at all. Because another thing is that Hong Kong has always been a trilingual country since the handover in 1997. They have a little policy that they follow. It's called biliterate and trilingual.
Can you
So,
explain what that policy is?
right. So it's like a biliterate. So you have to be able to read and write English and traditional Chinese characters, because traditional characters is what is used in Hong Kong. Um, Not simplified. Simplified is used in mainland China. And trilingual, as in Cantonese, English, Mandarin.
Gotcha.
I am thoroughly impressed that they've implemented something like that. And I would say it's been fairly successful, because as far as the locals that I've met, you know, I would hear all three languages, you know, and I'm sure they could most definitely read traditional English too. So,
Wow, that's so cool. I think like the closest thing we have to like a bilingual city might be Miami. And like all, because like there's a lot of diversity in like most of our cities in the United States, but like Miami, especially, at least on the East Coast, is like very much both.
Even Southern California, I feel like it's similar to Miami in terms of like that bilingual, um, just like kind of culture that exists there. It's interesting to hear that, that's what Hong Kong's been, going through in terms of, its language, and I guess like the demographic, like you said, was how it's been changing in the recent times. But let's take it back to you, Dorothy. let's discuss you growing up in Florida. So I know, you and I don't know, maybe Zach too, we're all we're all coming from areas that are predominantly non-Asian. I know from my hometown, Marlboro, New Jersey, it's predominantly a Caucasian town. So it was really difficult for me growing up and, trying to get that Asian/Asian American influence. But what about you, growing up in, the suburbs of South Florida?
Right. So, as you can see, Miami is diverse, but when people say that Miami is diverse, it's predominantly people who come from Latin countries. It is diverse, but it's like Hispanically diverse. It's not
Yeah.
a mix of like, oh, there's Asians, there's like all these like different ethnicities. Because I was never raised around a lot of Asians. I didn't know of any other Asian community in Miami. And yeah, that's why I've had like a little, confident issues and like in taking pride of my ancestry because
Yeah.
I just didn't have friends that could relate to the type of lifestyle and culture that I grew up with.
Yeah. I mean, did you feel, as Asian American, did you feel like you didn't belong growing up in your areas around like South Florida?
Um, Sometimes, most definitely, and it came down to the language. I don't know Spanish. As hard as I've tried for years, the schools in Miami really do push for you to learn Spanish, and I've taken so many years, but it's just never stuck.
I
It's
feel that.
hard in Miami because like there's so many different types of Spanish being thrown around.
There's so many different types of Spanish. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I mean, I took French for the past how many years? It doesn't help me at all. I wish I took Spanish.
Oh, but
Right.
like I took Spanish for 6 years, like 2 years in middle school, through high school, and Cuban Spanish is so difficult to understand as like a learner because it's so fast and everything's like slurred together. And
Mhm.
when you have like a majority or like out of all big subgroups in like the Latinx community, I think Cubans in Miami are definitely the largest. But that's probably what gets thrown around the most and understanding like the slang and just trying to comprehend all of it's just really difficult. So I can't blame you.
Right. And I also never really had an interest in it. I mean, it just wasn't my culture, and that's
Mhm.
why I've put in so much more work to learning, Mandarin and Cantonese. And that's why I've been able to learn more Mandarin in 3 years studying at than I have taking like 6+ years of Spanish. All throughout elementary and middle and high school, I took Spanish, but it just none of it stuck because I just didn't have an interest in it. But now that I've like, and that's like another interesting thing to me is like if you just have a little interest in it, you could definitely learn a language.
Mhm. For
Yeah.
sure. And I know that you said before that, you find, that you have a community now with, Hong Kong Students Association at University of Miami. How does, having that sense of belonging and finding that community, how does it connect with your identity?
It makes me really comfortable, especially finding like other Asian Americans that are kind of in the same boat. They want to improve their Cantonese because like we kind of see language as that gateway to validating like I can call myself half Chinese because I know the language, you know. And that's how I met Serafina. She was the prior president of Hong Kong Student Association. She is also an Asian American, first generation, and her Cantonese is far better than mine, but not like amazing. Like you could throw her in Hong Kong and she would get by just fine. At the end of the day, it's if you were not born there, it's very, very difficult to speak like a native speaker.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm in the same boat as you. I growing up in a predominantly Caucasian environment, I never really I found that sense of belonging with a few friends, but it wasn't until I came, to college and I joined, the different cultural orgs. So I joined Multicultural Student Association and Asian American Student Association, and then I got super involved with Filipino Student Association, and it felt like I described this to a friend once, me finding my community with, the Asian organizations at our university, it felt like coming home. It almost felt like I was back, almost like coming back home to the motherland, just because I had that community with people that shared the same interests and, the same passion for the culture that, we all share. Honestly, it was incredible.
And I think in a way, like these student organizations kind of serve as a way for, I guess, me to also validate myself because I know their culture. Like I know that, what Hong Kong street food is like, for example. So that's why I work towards planning fundraisers and events that cater towards making them feel nostalgic too, because the same thing that makes them feel nostalgic and miss home is also what makes me feel nostalgic and what I remember as a kid too. And I want to appeal especially to these international students because I feel it like it's kind of my responsibility and duty to bring a little piece of home back and share that on campus.
And not only that, like we said, it's allowing people from, Hong Kong, or for me, the Philippines, to have that little piece of home in like the college setting. But it's also a way for us to, raise awareness of our cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So Zach and I have mentioned in previous episodes that we are one of the most diverse groups in the United States, but when it comes to representation, we're often left out of the conversation as Asian Americans. So I guess having, these orgs and taking that responsibility um, in those different student organizations, it's allowing you to really push forward and raise awareness and show other people outside of this community, just how beautiful and how diverse, Asian cultures really are and what we have to offer.
Yeah.
Right.
For me, these organizations have been like a really easy place to find a community where that like you belong in. Because growing up, like I grew up in like the white suburbs of Pennsylvania, and like over time, the demographics been shifting more to like a white Indian town, and so I never had a lot of friends that were Asian American until I was a little bit older, and but most of my friends were Indian American, so like there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me, and those people that I did find like similar cultural similarities, we connected on like a different level, but most of my friends growing up were white, and so when I think of home, like that is my home and I belong there, but to other people it's weird because they don't see you as belonging, even though you grew up there. And a part of that ties to the perpetual foreigner um, stereotype, and that like you'll never be seen as an American. But that really threw me for a loop and kind of like made me question my identity because, I see myself as being from here, and but no one else does. And if I were to go, to the motherland, to Hong Kong, they would all be like, "What the hell is this kid doing?" Like he can't speak Cantonese or read or like like anything. Yeah, and I think I would be illiterate there. So it's kind of made me question like, where do I belong anywhere? And um, and that sense of belonging is something that's very hard to figure out. And I think coming to college and like having these different organizations made it a lot easier for me to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of this whole identity crisis situation, and I completely understand because that question that we all got as a kid, where are you from? I'd feel like I was born in Baptist Hospital right down the street in Miami. I'm from here. And they're like, no, like, where are your parents from? And I'm like, well, I guess Hong Kong. I guess I'm from Hong Kong, right? But it's hard for me to identify as like a Hong Konger when, for one, I wasn't born there, you know, and
Mhm.
I don't know their culture as well as I know Miami's because I was born here for and raised here for the past 20 years of my life. So this comes down to should we conform to what people think being an American is like, or do we conform to, you know, that other half of our identity of like what, uh, you know, Filipinos or Hong Kongers think they should be like? Like, does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
in terms of being an Asian American, we need to start really thinking about redefining identity as an Asian American. You are an Asian American. You are not just American, and you are not just, you know, Filipino or Chinese. You're a fusion of both. So how are we going to define this and, you know, establish a community that stands behind it? Because we're something special. We have mixtures of both cultures. So we're not really any less American or any less Chinese. We just know both. And
Yeah.
it's a really difficult topic because you don't hear a lot of conversations about that Asian American identity and specifically.
Yeah.
I absolutely love everything you just said.
I'm speechless.
That's one of the reasons we created this podcast, is to create a space, you know, to define ourselves as Asian Americans and to, you know, express our culture and share the things that go on in the community. And, you know,
Right.
we struggle, especially because Asian Americans are so weirdly dispersed. There's like big clusters in cities, and they're just like sprinkled through the country, you know? And like for the people who are sprinkled through the country, like kind of the three of us, we grew up in places that were non-Asian, you know, it's very difficult to find an Asian American community and, you know, identify as being part of that community and acknowledging that it exists and it's strong. And, you know, there's a lot of wonderful people in it, especially when you don't see people on TV that look like you know?
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think it's time for us to stop comparing ourselves to someone who is very, you know, has ancestry in America. They are very clearly American, and comparing ourselves to someone who's like a native in like the Philippines or a native in the Hong Kong, like from Hong Kong. Because the fact of the matter is that we can never be either one, and we need to stop comparing ourselves because that's just, it's not fair to ourselves to base our validation on how American are we, you know, or
Hmm.
how Chinese, Filipino am I? Like, we are ourselves and we're just a mixture, and we've just got to get people to understand that we're neither of these things. We're both, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So to get to these revelations that you've made, um, I'm curious, like, how did traveling to Hong Kong influence your reflection upon, you know, all of these experiences you've had, to, you know, bring you to a point where, you know, you just said all that stuff to us about, you know, we have to define our own space as Asian Americans. So I'm curious, you know, like, how did traveling to Hong Kong influence that?
Um, I definitely experienced the same, like, believe it or not, like that idea of the perpetual foreigner. Same thing in Hong Kong. Like, you can't have it all, you know? I'm a foreigner here. I get asked, like, oh my God, your English is amazing. I'm like, thank you. I mean, I was born here. Thank you. But then back in Hong Kong, uh, I'm also a foreigner. So I had the opportunity to get that same feeling of a foreigner but abroad. So it's just pushed me even more to think about that question of identity. You know, if I'm neither accepted here nor there, um, then how do I want to see myself and be happy with like the identity that I've chosen to label myself with, you know, Asian American. Um, So it's definitely like one of those hard lessons that I kind of had to have, uh, especially like going to Hong Kong, and like now I know, like they've told me to my face, I'm practically a foreigner. You know, my English is like a little too good for me to be from Hong Kong. Um, so yeah, I've sat down and kind of thought about it, and that's this is like kind of the culmination of the questions that I've tried to answer for myself in calling myself an Asian American. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I don't stare at the wall and do this for fun either. I'm also applying to a scholarship, and that's why I've had to think about it. So
No,
it's
it's
a good
just
time.
no, it's crazy because literally everything that I was thinking about, because I was thinking about the question too, and it's like everything that you said, I was thinking, and it's crazy because you know what, as Asian Americans, you know, we've struggled to fit in the United States because we don't look the same, and then when we go back to the motherland, like you said, our English is like we know English a little too well. We're immediately seen as born overseas. It hasn't been an easy path for us trying to figure out where, you know, we really belong, and you know how we define our own identities. And it's crazy to think about, you know, it because growing up, I really did my best to try and fit in with, you know, my American peers, and you know, I really didn't showcase my Asian background or my Filipino identity. And I didn't really showcase it until I came to college, and I stumbled across the Filipino Student Association, and I saw a group of people that were proud to be Filipino, and they wanted to let everybody know that, hey, we're Filipino and this is what our culture is about. I
Mhm.
thought like that's the first time that I really saw my culture being put on blast almost. And it really, I think that was the starting point for me to really take a look in the mirror and try and understand, you know, my own Asian American background and figure out, you know, I'm not American and I'm not Asian. I'm both. Like there's not one group that I'm going to fit into. Like people have to start accepting that, you know, Asian Americans are like we're here, but we
We
can't.
exist.
Yeah, we exist. We're not just like pick one or the other. We can't.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of, you know, our diverse backgrounds is that we take from both cultures and we make something so incredible that we can share with other people.
Hmm. If you really think about it, we're basically like a people, like Asian Americans are like a people without a country. You know, there's that American culture, there's the other culture, right? But you like notice how like each nation has their own distinct culture. But when you don't fit into neither one, you know, we're a community of people that are, like Zach said, very dispersed. We're everywhere, yet we don't have borders to define the type of culture, I guess, we represent, which is a fusion.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So we're gonna move on, and I would say if you were to give someone advice to, you know, figuring out their identity, someone who's never been to the motherland, what would you tell them?
Go to the motherland. See how your parents were raised, and see what your ancestors have seen and eaten, you know, hear the language, and it's definitely another level of connection that you cannot feel back at home. And that's like the beauty of, you know, traveling.
Okay, we actually have SituAsian Room questions that we ask every guest on our show.
Okay.
Um, so I hope you're ready. What does it mean to be Asian American Pacific Islander? What does that mean to you?
Wow, we practically like went over this question throughout the whole podcast.
But if you can like, solid, like just make it a short statement, what does it really mean to be Asian American?
Um, I have something to offer culturally to both Americans, but also like, native Hong Kongers alike. I see myself as that bridge where language isn't necessarily a problem for me because I understand both, but also culture wise, I have exposure to both. Going into either country, it's not a problem for me. There's no culture shock because I was raised around both. So I'm that median really. And I like to see myself as like someone who should serve and to help like get other people comfortable with like either or culture. If like American is traveling over to Hong Kong, I would have absolutely no problems like going with them and like helping them around, getting them situated, or whether or not there's an international student from Hong Kong coming over and studying at UM. And like, this is why I'm in the club. Like, I am here to help you feel comfortable. And I want you to feel like you're at home, but I also want you to be open to the American culture because why not? You're already here. So I see myself as that like tour guide between either one, and I'm very much comfortable being in America or Hong Kong.
I love it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm down to go to Hong Kong. I gotta go. So you mentioned, kind of being a bridge. And so food is often a bridge between people and a wonderful way to share one's culture. I know like Cantonese food culture is huge. Personally, one of my favorite parts. And this show, we love to talk about food. But we want to know, what is your favorite AAPI dish?
Oh my God. Bang Ke Dang. Have you heard of that? Eggs and tomatoes.
I've not.
That is like the most nostalgic food ever. I don't know if it's like a Hong Kong dish specifically. I have to look into that, but like all I know is that from day one I was born, that's what my mom cooked was scrambled eggs, tomato, ketchup, and white rice.
Ooh,
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's like
interesting.
one of the, yeah, yeah. And I've seen it served in Hong Kong too. So I don't know if it's like a Hong Kong specific dish, but that's definitely one of my favorites. I love food.
I
Yeah.
love it. All right. Who would you consider to be your AAPI role model?
Ooh, my mom. I hate to sound cheesy or anything, but like I just really admire her perseverance really because she moved to an entirely different country um, from Hong Kong when she was around 20 something years old. She had a job at a bank and then suddenly she was married and got a green card and went to the States. And she managed to make a life for herself too after getting divorced and with like 3 daughters. She had to do something. She hadn't worked for so long. So I'm really proud of her for managing to find an education in another country, and now she's okay. She's managing a salon. So yeah, she's definitely my role model. Just like her work ethic is
That's not
incredible.
cheesy at all. It's not
Huh?
cheesy. That's not cheesy at all. I think that's so sweet.
Oh, I
Like
love
I
that.
love my mom, so and I really look up to her.
Oh, I love that. So last question, how can people connect with you? Plug away your social media.
This is where you flex everything.
Oh, yeah, I have Instagram. Um, I don't know if you guys wanna how you guys are gonna put that
Just
in
drop your
there.
handles.
Just
Okay, well, it's Dorothy, DOROTHY underscore the underscore Asian. Pretty straightforward. That is my Instagram. Oh, and UMHKSA, please give that a follow. And we have amazing food events. Like you said, you guys love food. I love food too, and that's how I'm trying to get people to come to our events. Is definitely we're going to be cooking and giving a whole lot of free food.
Awesome. Dorothy, you've been an absolutely amazing guest. We're so thankful to have you on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to Dorothy Chan for coming into the SituAsian Room to share her experiences with us. And thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the SituAsian Room. The SituAsian Room is produced by Crimson Planet Media. Make sure to check out our website, www.situasianroom.com, where we'll have recipes for all the food we talk about in our Dish It Out segment. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook at the SituAsian Room for more content.
We want to hear from you guys. Send us messages through our website, on Instagram, send us a message on Facebook, and let us know what you want us to talk about next. But thank you again for joining us on this step of our journey through Asian America. Again, my name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach Ing.
Zach, you want to do this again next week?
Sure, same place.
Duh. All right, we'll see you guys next time.
I'm going to cut the recording. This is a fire episode.
You did it!